Iran just told the United States something that no one in Washington wanted to hear. They will not stop enriching uranium, not for sanctions, not for negotiations, not for anything. And right now, somewhere between Tehran and Tel Aviv, the most dangerous standoff on the planet is quietly moving toward a point of no return. To understand why this moment matters, you have to go back further than most people do. Not to 2015, not to the Obama-era nuclear deal. You have to go back to 1979. The Iranian Revolution didn't just change a government, it rewired an entire civilization's relationship with the outside world. The clerical leadership that took power that year built their identity around one core principle: Iran bows to no one. That principle isn't political theatre. It is the foundation everything else is built on. For 4 decades, Western powers tried to contain Iran through economic pressure, diplomatic isolation, and covert sabotage. Stuxnet, the cyber weapon that shredded centrifuges without firing a single bullet, bought Israel and the United States a few years. But it didn't stop anything. Every time the program was set back, it came back stronger. Iran learned from every attack. They dispersed their facilities. They buried them deeper. They hardened what couldn't be hidden. The program the world is dealing with today is not the naive early version. It is a system that was specifically designed to survive being targeted. Then came 2018. Donald Trump pulled the United States out of the JCPOA, the nuclear deal that had, for a brief window, frozen Iran's enrichment levels in exchange for sanctions relief. Tehran watched the agreement collapse and drew the obvious conclusion: deals with Washington don't hold. Why give up leverage for a promise that disappears with the next election cycle? After the withdrawal, Iran didn't just resume enrichment, they accelerated it. They pushed uranium enrichment to levels that have no civilian justification. 60% purity, 90% is weapons grade. The gap between where Iran sits today and a nuclear device is not a long walk. Israel watched all of this with a very different clock in mind. For Israeli defense planners, the question was never if Iran would pursue a bomb. The question was when they would cross the threshold where military intervention becomes impossible. That threshold has a name inside Israeli strategic circles. They call it the zone of immunity. The point where Iran's enrichment infrastructure is so dispersed, so hardened, and so advanced that no airstrike could set it back meaningfully. Some analysts believe Israel is approaching that window right now, and that changes the calculation for everyone. The talks scheduled in Pakistan were never going to be simple, but Iran walked into those negotiations carrying a message they had already decided on before anyone sat down at the table. The enrichment program is sovereign. It is non-negotiable. It is not a bargaining chip. It is a right. Tehran's position is built on a specific and deliberate argument. The Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty guarantees every signatory nation the right to peaceful nuclear development. Iran is a signatory. Therefore, enrichment is legal. The fact that no one believes the program is purely peaceful is, in their view, a political problem, not a legal one. There's a certain tactical intelligence in that framing. By anchoring the argument in international law, however selectively interpreted, Iran forces its opponents into a difficult position. Attacking the program looks like attacking sovereignty. Sanctioning it looks like punishing a legal right. Every time the West tries to build a coalition against Iran's nuclear ambitions, Tehran has a ready answer. You are the ones violating international norms, not us. Whether that argument convinces anyone outside Iran is almost beside the point. It convinces enough people to keep the diplomatic field complicated. But here is where the situation shifts from frustrating to genuinely alarming. The fragile ceasefire that has been holding in the region is not a peace. It is a pause maintained by exhaustion, not agreement. Hezbollah is rebuilt and rearmed to a degree that surprised even intelligence estimates. The proxy network Iran has spent 30 years constructing through Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Yemen, and Gaza didn't collapse under pressure. It adapted. Iran doesn't need to fire a single missile from its own territory to cause catastrophic damage to Israel. That network is the deterrence, and it is still very much intact. Israel understands this better than anyone. The October 7th attack and the war that followed demonstrated something uncomfortable for Israeli strategic planners. The old equations don't hold anymore. Iron Dome works, but it has limits. Sustained multi-front pressure from multiple directions simultaneously strains even the most. Advanced defensive architecture. The Iranian strategic model is not a direct confrontation. It is death by 1,000 proxies. Bleed the enemy, drain resources, erode morale, force internal political fractures. Iran plays the long game, and right now they believe time is on their side. Which brings us to the nuclear program itself. Because enrichment is not just about weapons, it is about leverage. A nuclear-capable Iran, even one that has not yet assembled a device, changes the entire power balance of the Middle East overnight. It creates an umbrella. Under that umbrella, proxies can operate with greater aggression because the calculus for retaliation shifts. You don't strike at the heart of a nuclear-capable state the way you strike at a conventional adversary. That is what Tehran wants, not necessarily to use a bomb, but to possess the credibility of one. The distinction matters enormously, and Western policymakers have been frustratingly slow to internalize it. For the United States, the picture is complicated by domestic politics, historical commitments, and the uncomfortable reality that no good option exists. A military strike on Iranian nuclear facilities would require massive, sustained air campaigns targeting dozens of hardened sites simultaneously. The logistics alone are staggering. The aftermath would be worse. A strike that doesn't fully destroy the program doesn't deter Iran. It radicalizes them. It hands the hardliners exactly the narrative they need, proof that the West seeks regime destruction, not nuclear limitation. If anything, an incomplete strike accelerates the drive toward an actual weapon, because at that point, Iran has nothing left to negotiate with and everything to prove. Negotiations, on the other hand, require Iran to trust that any agreement will outlast the current American administration. Given 2018, that trust is gone. Tehran has made clear they want structural guarantees, not just an executive agreement that a future president can tear up on day one. That's not an unreasonable demand, given the history. It is also, given the American political system, essentially impossible to guarantee. The two sides are speaking languages that structurally cannot produce the agreement either claims to want. If this standoff tips into open conflict, and the probability is no longer academic, the consequences radiate outward in ways that will touch every economy on the planet. Start with oil. The Strait of Hormuz is not a shipping lane. It is the jugular of the global energy system. Roughly 20% of the world's oil supply moves through that narrow corridor. Iran has mined it before. Iran has seized vessels in it before. In a direct conflict scenario, Tehran doesn't need to close the strait permanently. They just need to make it dangerous enough that insurance rates explode, tankers divert, and markets panic. The price of crude oil would spike in ways that would be felt at every gas station in the world within weeks. But the economic shockwaves don't stop at oil. Global supply chains that survived COVID disruptions that bent under Russia's invasion of Ukraine would face yet another stress test. The countries most exposed are not the United States or Western Europe. They have strategic petroleum reserves and diversified energy access. The countries most exposed are the emerging economies of Asia and Africa that import Middle Eastern oil on thin margins with no buffer. A regional war between Iran and Israel would create energy poverty in places that have nothing to do with the conflict and no ability to insulate themselves from it. Then there is the nuclear proliferation dimension, which may be the most consequential long-term consequence of all. If Iran crosses the nuclear threshold, even if it does so quietly without a test, in the way North Korea slowly accumulated capability before announcing it, the reaction from regional powers will not be passive. Saudi Arabia has already signaled with unusual directness that they will seek equivalent capability if Iran acquires one. Egypt has a history with nuclear ambition. Turkey is not a country that tolerates permanent strategic disadvantage from a regional rival. The Middle East nuclear cascade scenario is not a thriller novel premise. It is an outcome that defense analysts take seriously and that the world is genuinely unprepared to manage. Europe, already strained by the energy crisis triggered by Ukraine, faces a secondary crisis it hasn't fully wargamed. European countries that have quietly maintained economic links to Iran, trade relationships, humanitarian carve-outs, diplomatic back-channels, would be forced into choices that fracture alliance cohesion. The transatlantic relationship, already under pressure from debates about NATO spending and American political instability, would face a test that might be its most serious since the Iraq War debate in 2003. Some European governments would support an Israeli military operation, others would not. That split, if it comes, has consequences that outlast any individual conflict. And underneath all of this sits a question that no one in the policy world wants to say out loud. What if deterrence is already working? What if the reason the ceasefire, fragile as it is, has held, is precisely because both sides understand the stakes? Iran doesn't want a war that destroys its infrastructure. Israel doesn't want a war that tests the limits of its air defenses and reveals vulnerabilities that enemies will then exploit. The United States doesn't want a war that derails its Indo-Pacific strategy and hands China a free year of geopolitical breathing room, while Washington is consumed by a Middle East crisis. Every major actor in this drama has strong incentives not to shoot first. And yet, and this is what history teaches over and over again, wars rarely begin because someone decided they were a good idea. They begin because a miscalculation, a provocation, a moment of domestic political pressure produces an action that triggers a response that no one fully controls. The Cuban Missile Crisis ended well. It ended well partly by luck. The Middle East today has less luck built into the system and fewer direct communication channels between the parties that matter most. This is the story that will define the next decade of global geopolitics. Not the headlines, the structure beneath the headlines. The nuclear math, the energy exposure, the proxy architecture, the alliance fractures. That is what this channel exists to analyze. If you want to understand not just what is happening, but why it is happening and where it leads. Subscribe to Professor Jonathan Global Analyst. Hit the notification bell, because the next development in this story will not wait for you to catch up.